It was a night that dragged on slowly, like a sigh trapped in the throat of time. At Santa Maria Hospital, the silence was not a relief, but a pulsating, almost suffocating presence that seemed to whisper secrets through the empty corridors. The clock at the reception desk read midnight. The night shift had begun, and with it, Nurse Clara walked with soft, cold steps, almost inaudible, as if she herself were part of that veil of darkness. Clara was a woman with soft gestures and eyes that never revealed much, but that early morning, there was something different in her appearance. The older patients, those who could still afford to feel the air around them, realized even unconsciously that this would not be an ordinary night. The corridors, lit only by the weak yellow light, came to life through the shadows that lengthened and shrank each time Clara passed. Clara had a secret, one as dark as the pitch black outside. For months she had been feeling a need, something she herself could not explain. It was as if a distant whisper, coming from a forgotten corner of her soul, guided her every night. It began slowly, an extra drop of morphine here, a slightly altered dose there. The bodies faded away as gently as the lamps flickered in the rooms. And no one noticed, no one suspected. The patients left in peace, as many said. But Clara knew. And that night, she was determined to continue the dark ritual that possessed her. Her face was a mask of calm, but inside, frenzy consumed her. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the syringe. That substance was silent, invisible like the night itself. A poison that no one would see, that no one could track. She would inject it into each patient's vein with the same tenderness with which a mother sings a lullaby. Her first target that night was Mr. Augusto, an old man lying in his hospital bed, hooked up to an oxygen tube that was barely keeping him breathing. Clara entered the room, her face illuminated by the pale light that leaked through the door. She approached him with the delicacy of a shadow, and then, without a word, slid the needle into his fragile skin. Her eyes, cold as death itself, watched the liquid enter his bloodstream. The clock continued to tick away, indifferent. When Augusto took his last breath, something inside Clara broke. But she didn't stop. There were others. Others who awaited her final touch. The night went on, and each room she passed seemed to be enveloped by a dark, invisible mist. The heart monitors, once with their rhythmic beeping, now fell silent, one by one, like notes of a morbid melody disappearing into the air. Clara moved with an almost mechanical precision, but inside, her thoughts were spinning like a hurricane. What was she doing? Why did she feel such perverse pleasure with every silent sigh? The answer was a mystery even to her. However, something was disturbing her that night. A presence she couldn't explain, but she felt at every corner, in every room. Maybe it was her own guilt haunting her, maybe it was something darker, something waiting for her deep in her own soul. In a moment of carelessness, Clara looked at her reflection in the glass of the window of one of the rooms. And for a brief moment she didn't see herself. What stared at her from the other side was a figure that looked like a distorted version of her own face, with empty eyes, a crooked and cruel smile. Terrification, like an icy punch, took hold of Clara. She stepped back, dropping the tray of instruments on the floor. The sound echoed through the hallways, and for a second the entire hospital seemed to shrink. Something was deeply wrong. She tried to compose herself, but the feeling that she was being watched, that something else was there with her, wouldn't let her. Every shadow seemed denser, more vivid, as if the hospital corridors had been possessed by darkness itself. When she returned to the restroom, Clara found an envelope on the table. Her name was written in a handwriting she recognized immediately. Trembling, she opened the paper and read the cold words, "I know what you did." Panic finally engulfed her. The poison, the silence, the deaths. There was no escape. And in those final moments, Clara knew that the whisper that had guided her was not just an inner voice. It was a presence, something that fed on pain, on fear, and that now, finally, had found her. The last thing Clara heard before everything went dark was the soft sound of footsteps behind her. Before continuing this short video, to keep up with incredible content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. That way you'll be the first to receive all the news and won't miss a thing. And of course, leave your comment. We want to know what you think, your ideas and suggestions. Let's go on this journey together. 铃铛鬼魂 The sound of the footsteps was low, almost ethereal, as if coming from a world between the real and the spectral. Clara tried to move, but her body seemed trapped, paralyzed by terror. The darkness around her seemed to take shape, entangling her arms, trapping her breath, suffocating any attempt to escape. She felt the weight of something invisible on her shoulders, as if death itself were embracing her. The air in the room grew thick, and the silence, now absolute, echoed in her ears like a silent scream. She tried to turn to look over her shoulder, but her muscles would not obey. It was as if her own will was fading, fragmenting into 1,000 pieces, leaving her at the mercy of whatever was there. Cold crawled across her skin, and Clara, eyes wide, finally managed to turn her head. What she saw made her wish she had never looked. In the darkness, a figure stood. It was not human, but something very close. Her body was distorted, elongated, as if reality itself had twisted to give her shape. Her face, or what should have been a face, was a pale, expressionless mask with no clear features, just 2 holes where eyes should have been, black as the void. It was like looking into an abyss, and the abyss was looking back at her. The figure took a step forward, and with each movement, Clara felt her heart race uncontrollably, threatening to rupture her ribcage. Her body was shaking now, not from the cold, but from a primal fear that took over every cell, every thought. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat was dry, closed by the invisible hand of terror. The figure approached slowly, unhurriedly, as if it knew that time no longer belonged to Clara. There was an unspoken command in the atmosphere, an order that forced her to stay. Her feet seemed rooted to the ground, while the presence before her enveloped her completely. That thing was not just a creature, it was darkness itself made manifest. It was evil, the whisper Clara had heard all those nights. And then the figure spoke without moving its mouth. The voice echoed through the walls of Clara's mind, an ancient and cruel voice, steeped in pain and suffering. I saw it. I've always seen it. Clara felt the words tear at her sanity like sharp claws. They weren't just spoken, they were felt like a poison injected directly into her soul. Every death, every breath she had silenced, was now a weight that fell on her shoulders with crushing force. She tried to justify herself, tried to find a reason for what she had done, but the figure gave her no time. You gave yourself to me the first time. Reality around Clara began to distort. The once familiar walls of the hospital dissolved into a gray haze. The corridors seemed to stretch in impossible directions, and the faces of the patients, all those she had freed, began to appear in the shadows, their eyes glazed, empty, yet somehow full of accusation. Clara, now consumed by horror, tried to move, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The figure before her seemed to grow, its shadow expanding until it covered every corner of the room. The air became unbreathable. Her breath became labored, and panic took hold of her completely. All she wanted now was oblivion, the end. But the figure would not grant her that gift. In one swift movement, the shadows enveloped her completely, squeezing her, suffocating her. Clara tried to fight, but her strength disappeared. And as her body was enveloped by the pitch black, she finally understood. It was not just death that awaited her. It was something much worse. Something that would follow her forever. The souls she had taken were now all around her, and in a final flash of consciousness, Clara heard the sound of their screams, no longer silent, but in an anguished chorus, all crying out for justice. And as the world finally faded around her, the figure whispered one last time, "You are one of us now." And Clara, the night nurse, dissolved into eternal darkness, destined to walk forever the halls of her own madness, trapped between the living and the dead, whispering the same song that had once guided her hands. Now she was the one hunting.